Well, we've once again made it to the end of another week, meaning it's time to return to the series where I turn to you, the viewers, to lead the discussion, being your take, not mine. In this weekly series, I make a community post on my channel asking for you all to submit some of your hottest takes around the NBA world, and I pick some of my favorite ones and discuss them in a video, so if you want a chance to be included in a future episode, make sure to stay on the lookout for those posts so you can submit your take. Before we get started though, it turns out about 76% of you watching right now aren't even subscribed to the channel, so please, if you enjoy the content, consider hitting the subscribe button, because not only does it help out a ton, but I would also very much appreciate it. Now, with that being said, let's begin. The first submission we'll be discussing comes to us from Dallin, and he says that Jamal Murray is both a better scorer and all-around player than Trae Young is. This is a battle of two incredibly promising young point guards on the rise, and both are coming off of stellar seasons where they did a ton to boost themselves up in the eyes of the fans. Murray may not have been turning heads much in the regular season, but once the postseason started, he took his game to another level and exploded for 2 50-point games and 2 more 40-point games, along with other very strong performances along the way, scoring more effectively than he ever had in his career. Trae Young, on the other hand, may not have been participating in the playoffs, but after averaging 30 points and 9 assists per game in the regular season in just his second year in the league, he made plenty of noise himself. Now, head-to-head, this is tough, because in Murray's case, you have to acknowledge that performing in the playoffs means more, but then you also have to acknowledge that Murray has an immensely better supporting cast than Trae has, and Murray himself isn't even the best player on his team, while Trae has to do everything offensively for the lowly Hawks. Additionally though, we also have to admit that Trae is a pretty bad defender, ranking as one of the worst in the whole league, but Murray's never really been much of a defensive maestro either, so it's an area that Murray has a slight edge in. I personally think I would take Trae over Jamal as individuals, because offensively, Trae has proven that he can carry a large brunt of the offensive load and produce at an elite level, while Murray's been highly inconsistent during most seasons of his career, but obviously he's trending in the right direction as well with the way that he played in the playoffs. The next submission we'll be discussing comes from Scargame, and he says that Ben Simmons should be playing center because he has a similar skill set to Bam Adebayo, and he's held back while playing alongside a center. This is a topic that has been discussed by fans and analysts for quite some time regarding Ben, and while in theory it makes a lot of sense, I don't fully agree with the premise. A lot of the discussion around Ben gets way too overly complicated, and there's a lot of false narratives that surround the way that he plays, and the simple truth of the matter is that he needs shooters and shot creators around him to space the floor regardless of position. The pairing between him and Joel Embiid, statistically speaking, has been one of the most effective and impactful duos throughout the 3 seasons that they've played together statistically, but the struggles that the team faces stems in large part from everyone else in the supporting cast. The Sixers have done a very poor job surrounding those two with viable floor spacers, and they've done an even worse job giving them scoring options that can create their own offense off the dribble, which in turn has put way too much pressure on them to create almost all of the offense while simultaneously being limited themselves. I'm not necessarily saying Ben wouldn't do as well at center technically, but I think also that playing him there limits his defensive potential, because then he would be forced to match up on defense with other big men, and a lot of his first team all-defense level impact on defense comes as a perimeter defender. What Ben needs around him are guys that can shoot the basketball, and probably 1 or 2 other players that can create offense for themselves, and sticking him at center really doesn't solve any of those issues. The next submission comes to us from Gallegos, and he says that he thinks the Warriors are becoming overrated now, and that he only sees them as a 6th seed because their depth is not nearly as good as it was during their championship runs. With Steph Curry and Klay Thompson coming back to full strength next year, the hype around the return of the Warriors has definitely risen a ton. National pundits are predicting them to return to title contention. They believe they are as good as anybody in the West, and the battle at the top top should certainly include them in the eyes of many, but is this realistic? Draymond Green is coming off of his worst year since he's become a starter, Andrew Wiggins has always been a wildly inconsistent player who struggles to impact the game past scoring, and their bench is made up of a ton of young and inexperienced players like Eric Paschall, Marquise Chris, Damian Lee, and Jordan Poole, who all can be decent players but not necessarily reliable enough for a championship run. The team is also maxed out money-wise, so addition through free agency isn't really a realistic thing to expect, but they do have the number 2 pick in the draft this year, which is definitely a plus. Bringing in a player like Anthony Edwards or James Wiseman would be a great thing for the future, but again, putting lofty expectations on a rookie to help a title contender compete just doesn't seem likely. Steph Curry and Klay Thompson will have a lot of pressure to lead the way, and honestly, I kind of agree with the original submission in that I can see them being a good playoff team, but I'm just not sure they'll be at the top of the West. The next submission we'll be discussing comes to us from Ben, and he says that James Harden's defense has become underrated because people still seem to think he's terrible, but he isn't. This is the one that stuck out to me because I've been fully on board with this for a while now. I just haven't ever really been able to talk about it much in a video. James Harden, about 5 or 6 years ago, was a poor defender, and he gained a reputation as such, but especially over the last few seasons, people really seem to ignore how much improvement he's made on that end, to the point where he's now actually a highly impactful player there. According to Synergy Sports, Harden ranks as a very good pick and roll defender, a good isolation defender, an elite post defender, and a good spot up defender comparative to the rest of the players in the league, which is really saying something. His ability to hold his own in isolation and also switch seamlessly onto big men and stand his ground in the post is key to Houston's switching defense, and honestly, I couldn't agree more that Harden deserves more credit for his effort there on defense. And finally, the last submission we'll be discussing today comes to us from Nick, and he says that the playoffs should not completely change the view of players simply because of one good or bad playoff run. In a sense, I agree that people tend to be way too reactionary, and recency bias definitely has a big impact on how players are judged, but only to a certain degree. I think if two players are very close together in terms of where they rank in the league, siding with the one that performs better in the postseason is completely valid. However, plenty of people take this too far and start comparing players in very different tiers of talent simply because of one good or bad playoff run where they may have either overperformed or underperformed. In the cases of Pascal Siakam and Jamal Murray, as were used as examples in this post, Siakam was seen as a top 20 player in the regular season, and I don't think he should dip much below that just because of one bad postseason. And as for Jamal Murray, he wasn't even in the conversation for being a top 10 point guard before the playoffs started, but now after how well he played, he might still not be a lock for top 10, but he does now deserve to be in the conversation. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below what you think of the topics we discussed. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.